Hey everybody, it's InnoVision. With so many handheld gaming PCs out there and so many new ones coming out over the horizon, you might be wondering, is now a good time to get one of these devices or should I wait? You might be like, I do want to get one, but I don't know which one to choose. Or even better yet, you might be like, I already have one of these and I don't know if I made the right choice. Today, we're going to address all of these burning questions and so much more. We'll provide a high-level overview of the computer architecture that's used to power the best devices in this class. We'll go over the devices that are the key players in this space, and we'll go over the various criteria to help you choose the best device that fits your lifestyle. We've been seeing a ton of questions and opinions, and some of them have not necessarily been founded in reality. They're coming from a place of fear. People are saying there's too many handheld gaming PCs out there and they're just tired of how many things are out there to choose from. They're over it. I think it's a great thing. Some people are even saying, I'm just going to wait to buy one of these devices because there's so many of them and I don't want to pick one that's going to be obsolete. We just had to get this off our chest. This is the absolute best time to get a handheld gaming PC if you don't already have one. Currently, both Intel and AMD make chipsets that vendors use to actually design and build these devices. At the moment, the offerings from Intel are suboptimal. They have poor performance and they're not widely adopted and supported by vendors yet. So at this time, all the solutions we're going to discuss are based on AMD chipsets. So all of the current handheld gaming PCs that are worth your time and money are all loosely based on a similar, if not the same, chipset. They're based on an APU that uses the Zen architecture. This is developed by AMD, and APU stands for Accelerated Processing Unit. An APU is just a fancy way of saying that the CPU, the processor, and the graphics card share the same piece of silicon. They're basically coprocessors that live in the same space and share the same memory. And the typical design that's used to make these devices is something called system-on-chip design or system-on-chip architecture. And so a lot of the hesitation or reserve a person may have in buying one of these devices is that they're not as easily upgradable. That's because the system-on-chip design means that the processor, the graphics card, the memory, and sometimes even the hard drive are all soldered in together on the same board. And so that means you can't upgrade it very easily. And so that brings a lot of hesitation. But this is actually industry-wide practice. This isn't something that's new here. Your cell phones, your tablets, even some laptop computers like Apple's M-series laptops and maybe even some earlier ones use the system-on-chip design. And so I don't see that as a negative, but I think a lot of people do think of it as a negative because we couple the word PC gaming under the same umbrella. And typically PC gamers are used to interchanging parts and swapping out components to get the best performance. And so we see where the concern comes from. It's a whole different class of machinery and you have to view it and use it in the space that it was intended to be used in. I mean, it's amazing that you can pack one of these things up in your backpack and you have your PC game library with you wherever you want to go. And so I don't expect these things to pump out, the same quality graphics as a RTX 4080 or 4090. But what I do expect is that I should be able to play it at a decent frame rate at a low resolution and possibly even do it over a battery. So the number of handheld gaming PCs out there is truly a great thing. I don't think that there are too many in this landscape, and I think that the sheer number of them is creating a healthy competition between the companies that are contending for gamers' hard-earned money. Another reason this competition is good is because it doesn't allow a company to rest on their own laurels. They're constantly having to innovate, come up with the next thing, and it also keeps pricing fair to some degree. Now we know some of these devices have been out for 1 to 2 years now, and so that might also be part of the concern of like, hey, is now the right time to buy one of these devices? And we're here to tell you this is absolutely the best time to buy one of these devices for several reasons. First and foremost, all of the hardware and software issues that have riddled these devices at launch have now been worked out. So somebody coming in today and buying one of these devices is going to have a much better experience than somebody who got this at launch. And then last but not least, the kind of maybe even the most important point here, the reason why it remains a good time to buy one of these devices is that these are all based on the Zen architecture. The Steam Deck right here has the Zen 2 architecture. The Lenovo Legion Go uses the Zen 4 architecture, and they just released the Zen 5 architecture last month. And so we're going to start seeing laptops and computers that use the Zen 5 APU. But all of that takes time to shrink it down and distill it into a system on chip design that can fit into the case of one of these devices, that will have, the right thermal characteristics and heat dissipation, the right performance on a battery. Also, you have to integrate Wi-Fi chipsets. You have to do all kinds of integration, shrinking down of the components. That all takes a year or two to do anyways. And on top of that, you got to make device drivers and kernel updates to whatever operating system you're using. So rest assured, if you were to buy one of these today, it's going to be at least another year or two before you start to see devices that are going to replace these and make these devices obsolete. As we mentioned earlier, there are 3 key players in this space today. And the 3 key players are all based on the same system on chip design, same CPU architecture, GPU architecture. What we have right here in front of us are 2 of the 3 devices that I would recommend to you today. And the third one that's not on this table is the ASUS ROG Ally. I didn't feel a need to get that, but we'll talk about that later. So what we have right here is the OG original Steam Deck. This came out in 2022. And this is based on the Zen 2 architecture. And while the Lenovo Legion Go is based on the Zen 4 architecture, I think it's very important to call out that while this is a much older APU architecture, it was custom designed between Valve and AMD. And so it's not your typical off-the-shelf Zen 2. It was one codename Van Gogh. And so it's got certain characteristics that make it better for gaming and being in this handheld form factor. So I don't think you should discount it immediately just because it's 2 generations older than the Zen 4 that we see here in the Legion Go. In fact, what we see in the Legion Go is a lot less customized, and that's probably why Lenovo and ASUS ended up having to use the Zen 4, because they needed the most performance they can get with something that they can just take off the shelf. Also, it's important to note that whatever customization that Valve did for the Steam Deck is because of the software they're using is heavily customized, and we'll get to that in a little bit. All the devices we're going to talk about today have a touch screen. Some of them have a haptic touch enabled trackpad, but not all of them do. And all of them have some kind of built-in video game controller capability. So what we have in front of us right now is the original LCD Steam Deck. Now this one I upgraded to 1 terabyte drive. In the Steam Deck line of devices, there's the LCD Steam Deck, and this came out in 2022. And then there's an OLED Steam Deck, which came out in 2023. And the OLED Steam Deck and this Steam Deck are virtually the same, except for the screen and updated Wi-Fi chipset. But we should note that the CPU fabrication process that was used to make the Zen 2 that goes in the Steam Deck OLED is a 6 nanometer process, whereas the one that's used in the LCD Steam Deck is a 7 nanometer process. And so that means it's just like slightly better battery performance on a battery because it uses slightly less power. But the big benefits for the Steam Deck OLED come from the fact that it's using an OLED screen, which requires a lot less electricity to run. And so it's also going to run a lot cooler because of that. And so it gives better battery life, better thermal characteristics. We should also note that all the devices that we're going to talk about today have a touch screen, but the Steam Deck line family has 2 haptic touchpads. So the OG Steam Deck LCD has a 1280 by 800 resolution display that refreshes at 60 Hz or 60 frames per second. The Steam Deck OLED has a 1280 by 800 resolution display that refreshes at 90 frames per second. And both the Steam Deck and Steam Deck OLED uses a 2230 form factor NVMe SSD that is upgradable. Another really nice thing about the Steam Deck line of devices is that they all come with their own carrying case. So in general, the Steam Deck and Steam Deck OLED have kind of the lowest price point, and so they have the lowest barrier to entry in terms of cost for gamers out there. So I think it's important to note there were many other handheld gaming PCs that came out before the Steam Deck, but they're a lot less known, a lot less supported, and they're not as polished as the Steam Deck experience. So the Steam Deck really marks the beginning of handheld PC gaming as we know it today. And there are a few things that really make the Steam Deck stand out. It's using, not only is it using custom hardware that it worked on with AMD, it's using a custom Linux kernel and Linux distribution known as SteamOS. Because they have this customized Linux distribution, they're able to work aggressively with AMD to make custom drivers and firmware kernel updates to make sure that the system runs as smoothly as possible. But also the fact that it's based on Linux is a double-edged sword. It might have stability and memory management that is kind of like first in class compared to other handheld gaming PCs. It's going to be limited in terms of software in some cases. So majority of your Steam library will be able to be installed on the Steam Deck, but some games have problems running. And so there's the reason this is because it's using a software compatibility layer known as Proton. Proton will help take a Windows program, unpack it, install it in the right directories, and then use Vulkan shaders, which is a type of GPU shader, to run the same instructions that the GPU would run in DirectX. And so, you basically have this thin software layer that's living between you and your game. And so, in some cases, it can introduce some very light, almost negligible overhead. But that also means that it's not always working with games right out of the box. Most non-Steam game storefronts have workarounds that will allow you to install the games and play them. But the big one that is still limited and probably will be for forever is Xbox Game Pass. Now, there are ways to run Game Pass using cloud gaming. I personally don't like cloud gaming. I like to install the game natively on my device and run it on my device because I hate waiting in line for the cloud gaming. Also, the pixel quality looks like junk. I mean, I'm a visual quality fanatic, so I just can't do that. But the limitation there is that all Xbox Game Pass games that run on PC are compiled using something called UWP, or Universal Windows Program, and that means that the program itself, the executable, it expects certain components and features of the Windows kernel to be present just to be able to decrypt and execute the program. So unless Microsoft sees a reason to make UWP programs run on a SteamOS device, I don't see that happening. It's very important to note that any of the games that have been labeled as Steam Deck verified all have a first-in-class, beautiful gaming experience. And that's because SteamOS, of all the gaming handhelds, gives a console gaming-like experience. You have Steam kind of running in big picture mode. You can scroll through all your titles, and you can pick which one you want to play. And so it's the most natural experience for a gamer to be able to just click through their library and play what they want. And so anything that's already been vetted through the Steam verification program and labeled as a Steam Deck verified game is going to play without any problems right out of the box. The double-edged sword part comes from the fact that not all games have been Steam Deck verified. And there are ways to get games that have not been Steam Deck verified up and running. I also think it's important to note that the technology that Proton DB is based on uses shaders called Vulkan shaders. And so the DirectX shaders, which are native to Windows games and Windows applications, have been pre-compiled using Vulkan shaders. And so the hardware accelerated piece that's needed to execute your game is going to be as fast as it would be on a Windows device, even though it's running through that compatibility layer. The overhead, which is negligible, like I've said before, it comes from the instructions that are used to execute the game, not the GPU part. And even a lot of those instructions can be hardware accelerated using intrinsics and things like that. And I'm sure the developers of Proton are taking all of these tricks into account when they're optimizing their code. So I don't want you leaving this conversation thinking that the Steam Deck is less performant because of this. It's just something that needs to be done because it's two different operating systems. Now we have some final closing remarks about the Steam Deck before we move on to the next device worth recommending. Of all the key players in this space, Valve is the only one that's not predominantly a hardware manufacturer. For example, ASUS, they make a bunch of hardware geared towards gamers. Lenovo makes high quality laptops, some of which are also catered towards gamers. So those two companies are really in the business of making hardware. Whereas Valve, who makes the Steam Deck, they're in the business of selling you digital games from their digital game storefront. And it's for that reason we believe that the Steam Deck, even this older model that's from 2022, will be supported for several years to come. In fact, the first Steam Deck that we have right here, it was actually sold at a loss. Valve basically recovered their investment by selling you games. And so the last thing they're going to want to do is disrupt their install base. So I have a feeling, given that it's customized hardware and software, they will support it for quite a while, relative to the support we might see for the other key players in this space. So another thing worth mentioning here is this dock that we have on the table. So this is the JSOC dock. This actually works with all the handheld gaming PCs that we talk about today. And what's really cool about this is you can plug in your power adapter from whichever handheld gaming PC you have. It goes in USB-C power in, and then the USB-C port plugs into your device, but it enhances it by giving it an HDMI port and some USB ports. And so that's really cool because you can hook it up to a monitor or TV if you want to do a TV gaming session. So the other key player in this space is ASUS. Their offerings are the ROG Ally and the ROG Ally X. The ROG Ally came out in 2023 and the Ally X just came out in this year, 2024. And generally speaking, they're both based on the same SoC, both based on the same chipset architecture and everything. They're based on the Zen 4 chipset, and there is a lower end model based on the Z1 processor. We can't recommend that one, but the ROG Ally that's based on the Z1 Extreme processor, which is the exact same processor that you'll see in the Lenovo Legion Go later. So the Z1 Extreme processor is used by both the high-end Ally and the Ally X. Before we get to the key differences between the Ally and Ally X, let's just talk about it relative to the Steam Deck. So, like the Steam Deck, the Ally has a touchscreen and a built-in gamepad functionality, but it does not have trackpad, and the device runs Windows 11. And so from a holistic system point of view, it might not be the ideal user experience for somebody who's kind of a newcomer in this space. That's because Windows 11, you have to move around the operating system, click which game launcher you want to use, pick the game you want to launch. And so it's not as user-friendly for somebody who's not used to tinkering and working on PC games. And also, you don't get the mouse support. So if you want to play a game that uses mouse, you're going to have to use the touch screen. That might come off as a little awkward. With that said, the thing that the ASUS ROG Ally brought to the table when it launched in 2023 was better performance compared to the Steam Deck. And that's because it's running a newer chipset. And it brings with it a higher resolution display. So it's 1920 by 1080, so it's full 1080p, full HD. And it's got a higher refresh rate at 120 frames per second. The ROG Ally is a very nice device too in terms of its form factor. The Lenovo Legion Go, which we'll talk about in a little bit, it's a chunky boy. It's pretty big, whereas the ASUS ROG Ally has a similar form factor to the Steam Deck, so it's a little bit more ergonomic, easier to hold, easier to play games on. And the other key benefit to it running Windows is the fact that you can natively install all your Windows applications. You can run Game Pass, for example, without having to go through the cloud gaming avenue. We don't have a ROG Ally or Ally X. It is one of the devices we could recommend because it offers a good price for performance. It is well known enough, well supported enough. So the key differences between the ROG Ally and the ROG Ally X is the Ally that's running on the Z1 Extreme, it has 16 gigs of RAM, whereas the Ally X has 24 gigs of RAM, and the RAM's at a higher clock rate on the Ally X. And the other thing is that the ROG Ally has a proprietary GPU port used for interfacing to external GPUs, whereas the Ally X has 2 USB Type-C ports with Thunderbolt compatibility. So you have a kind of wider variety of eGPUs that you can interface with. And there might be some other nuances and differences. Also, I don't want anyone to get too caught up on all the differences in the different specs that we have here. At the end, we have a table where we're going to stack all the devices side by side, and you can kind of take a look at all the differences for yourself. We're going to link the device table into the description of this video. Also, we're going to have a list of glossary and terms that you can look at the description in this video. The ROG Ally uses a 2230 form factor NVMe SSD, whereas the ROG Ally X, the newer model, uses a 2280 form factor NVMe SSD. That's really nice because there's a lot more options for 2280 drives out there. And so that means that you can just take one off the shelf and install it in your ROG Ally X without having to do any kind of aftermarket modifications to get the drive to work with your device. Another thing that the ROG Ally X brings to the table that none of the other handheld gaming PCs does, it's got an 80 watt-hour battery. So it has the biggest capacity battery of all the devices. Now note that the Steam Deck OLED, since it's using an OLED display and has a slightly bigger capacity battery compared to the OG Steam Deck, it also can obtain a really nice battery life, but the ROG Ally X just comes with a much bigger battery. It's going to be able to support longer play on batteries simply because it just has a bigger battery. So the ROG Ally with the Z1 Extreme processor is more expensive than the Steam Deck and Steam Deck OLED, and the ROG Ally X is the most expensive handheld gaming PC that we discussed here today. So that's something you need to keep in mind. One final thought about the ROG Ally devices is they do not come with a carrying case. If this was the device that you're going to pursue, you're going to have to set aside a budget to also buy a carrying case. So the last key player we're going to introduce in the handheld PC gaming space is the Lenovo Legion Go, which we have right here. Now this one is one of my personal favorites. Let's talk about some of the things that it does a little bit differently. It uses a 2242 form factor NVMe SSD, and that form factor is a little bit harder to shop for than the 2230 and definitely harder to shop for than the 2280 form factor. There may be like a handful of drives that are single-sided, which Lenovo recommends using, and they all run very hot. So we actually put together another video about the illest mod of the century, and in that mod we basically install a full 2280 NVMe SSD, and the reason being is I wanted to be able to dual boot. This device ships with Windows 11, and I want to be able to dual boot between Bazzite, which gives me a SteamOS-like experience. And I want to be able to dual boot so that way I can, use Game Pass and get firmware updates and things like that. But one of the really neat things about this device is it comes with a kickstand, so you don't need a special dock to hold it up. The other really neat thing about this device is that the controllers are detachable. And one of the controllers even has a trackpad built in. So you can play things that require your trackpad, if there's any RTS games that you want to play and things of that nature. It also has a special adapter to use it as an optical mouse. There's an optical sensor at the bottom if you want to do first-person shooter mode. I don't really play with that, but I could see where some people would appreciate that. But even if you're into Nintendo Switch or Wii U emulation, you can use these as like Joy-Cons or Wii remotes. One of the things this device does that none of the other ones do, it has the largest in its class display. It has an 8.8-inch touchscreen display that supports 2560 by 1600 resolution, and it refreshes at 144 frames per second. This has a beautiful display. It is an LCD display, so it does get a little bit warm. Because it's an LCD display, it has a bigger power draw. So of the devices, it's probably going to have the lowest battery life. So if that's something that's important to you, you should consider like the Steam Deck OLED or the ROG Ally X. So I use my Lenovo Legion Go daily. It's my daily driver. I use my Steam Deck when I travel because it's a little bit smaller and a little bit more ergonomic. This one with the 8.8-inch touchscreen, it is a chunky boy. It also is a little bit less ergonomic compared to the Steam Deck and the ROG Ally. And I think Lenovo had all that in mind when they designed it, because they gave it the detachable controller design and it sports tabletop gaming mode, which is really nice. But I like to use this because when I'm around the house, if everyone else wants to use the TV, I can sit down with this in my lap and play whatever game I want and still hang out with everyone. So another neat thing about this hardware, it uses the same Z1 Extreme chipset that's used in the ROG Ally, the higher end ROG Ally and the Ally X. The main difference is that it's got faster DDR5 memory, and so that faster DDR memory is the same clock speeds that are used in the ROG Ally X. So this was the first device to provide that higher clock speed in the memory. I actually don't use that feature. I haven't spent too much time studying it yet, but what I do notice is that when I have the faster clock speed enabled, it creates contingency between the power draw between the processor, the GPU, and the RAM. And so I found that, like, the settings I like to use the most, if I'm in Steam or Bazzite, I use the 15 TDP mode. I limit the TDP to 15 watts. If I'm in Windows, I just use the auto settings. And ever since the latest set of firmware updates, graphics card driver updates, and Legion Space updates, even on Windows, this feels like a much better experience. I find myself actually using the Legion Space app. Before, I wasn't using it that much. I would just start up in Steam with big picture mode. The one thing that I really like about Bazzite is that it does give the more console-like experience that the Steam Deck provides. I do notice in some games it runs a little bit better, but in the majority of them, they actually run a lot faster in Windows. Like, for example, Diablo 4, I'm able to get, like, 20 or more frames per second higher frame rate than I can on the under Bazzite. But there's something to be said about also too the starting of your program and the shutting down of it does run a lot better under the Steam Deck experience. So another important note about the Lenovo Legion Go, there are rumors swirling around that they're going to be doing a device refresh. So if you were thinking about getting the Lenovo Legion Go, this is, I would say, it's definitely a great time to get one still. Lenovo has legendary support. I know that there's been some support issues with the ASUS ROG Ally, and so also from my perspective, that's one of the reasons I didn't pick that one. But also too, at the time the ROG Ally came out, there were rumors about Lenovo making a device and that it would use the Z1 chipset, and so I didn't see much reason to go with that. I was going to wait and see what Lenovo was going to offer. At that time, I'm glad I waited. Right now, there are rumors going on about there being a slimmer or more streamlined version of the Legion Go. If you're wanting to get the Legion Go, maybe wait until that announcement comes out to find it at a better price. But all the time they're running promotions and sales. Like just a few weeks ago, you were able to pick up the 512 gig version of it, I think for around $600 US. So you can find deals. So if you want to buy the Legion Go, wait until you get a good deal. I wouldn't buy it at MSRP, but if you're committed to buying that one, go for it. I think their support is legendary. I actually wrote into them because my carrying case was getting a tear in it. They just replaced it, no questions asked. So to help make it easier for you to pick the right device, we put together a table of all of the PC gaming handhelds we've discussed in this video so far. And so starting from left to right, we've got the Steam Deck and OLED, the ROG Ally devices, and the Lenovo Legion Go. And in this table, we put together all the specs, the starting cost, we put together what operating system it runs, the battery capacity, so on and so forth. And so just at a quick glance, you can kind of see and compare the devices given the performance. So don't worry, we're going to link this in the description of the video. So pull it up and look at it in your own time. We're about to go over which device to get based on your lifestyle. And then using that discussion, you can decide if you already have one of these devices, did you pick the right device? So to answer the burning question we've all been waiting for, which one of these PC gaming handhelds should you choose and why? If you're completely new to PC gaming, get a Steam Deck or Steam Deck OLED. If you've been playing PC games for years and are comfortable using Windows to get around, get a Lenovo Legion Go or an ASUS ROG Ally. If you're on a tight budget and want to spend the least amount of money possible, get an OG Steam Deck LCD. It starts at around $350, and that puts it at a price range that's competitive with a console gaming experience like a Nintendo Switch. If you want the biggest display, get the Lenovo Legion Go. If you want the absolute best battery life, get a Steam Deck OLED or a ROG Ally X. If you want the best performance in a handheld gaming device, get a Lenovo Legion Go or a ROG Ally X. If you want the most memory available on a handheld gaming PC, get the ROG Ally X. I didn't see much reason to get the ROG Ally X given that I already have the Lenovo Legion Go, and I'm also of the school of thought that having that additional memory might not help so much at lower resolutions. Any of the AAA games or really big titles, you can't really run with high settings anyways, and you can't really run in a big resolution anyways. So I don't know having that extra memory will help. If I had a device, I would actually test it and post the results here for everyone to see. But I don't feel like it will make a big difference. But time will tell if I ever get one or start looking at results from some other people. If you absolutely need mouse input for your games, get a Steam Deck device or a Lenovo Legion Go. If you absolutely have to have access to Game Pass, get a Lenovo Legion Go or an ASUS ROG Ally. If you want a console-like gaming experience and you're not comfortable with tinkering, get a Steam Deck or Steam Deck OLED. If you want a console-like experience and you are comfortable with tinkering, get a Lenovo Legion Go or a ROG Ally and dual boot it between Windows and Bazzite so you can kind of get the best of both worlds. I would like to thank everyone for joining our discussion on PC gaming handhelds today. Don't forget to post comments, questions, engage in the discussion. That's what makes this community work. And don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all the cool information, tips, tricks, and mods.